My heart attack wasn't the kind of dramatic event you see in the movies. No clutching my chest and gasping for breath. It was more subtle, creeping up like an unwanted memory, a dull ache that spread across my chest and into my left arm. I remember sitting in my recliner, the old leather creaking under me as I tried to convince myself it was just indigestion, but deep down, I knew. I called 911 and the paramedics rushed me to the hospital. It all felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel on a dimly lit screen. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and uncertainty. I spent hours in a sterile room, hooked up to machines that beeped incessantly, a constant reminder that something inside me was failing. The doctors came and went, speaking in calm, measured tones, their words a blur of medical jargon that barely registered. All I could think about was my daughter Emily. I needed her to hear this, to understand that her old man wasn't invincible. When she finally arrived, her face was a mask of indifference. Emily had always been distant, a trait she'd inherited from her mother, my ex-wife, Karen. It was a bitterness that had grown over the years, nurtured by the seeds of our messy divorce. Karen had left me for a man who promised her the world, and in the process, she took a good chunk of our savings. I was left with a hollow bank account and a deeper hollow in my heart. Emily sided with her mother, convinced by her lies and manipulations. As I lay there, vulnerable and exposed, I reached out to Emily, hoping for some semblance of support. Instead, she looked at me with cold eyes, her arms crossed defensively. "Dad," she said, her voice devoid of warmth, "you need to find your own way home from the hospital." Her words hit me harder than any physical pain I had ever felt. She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me alone with the echo of her betrayal. In that moment, I realized the true extent of the damage Karen had done. It wasn't just about the money she'd siphoned from our accounts or the affair that had shattered our family. It was about the wedge she'd driven between me and my daughter, twisting the knife of betrayal deeper every time Emily chose her mother's side. As the hospital machines kept their relentless vigil over my weakened heart, I lay there, grappling with the fragments of my shattered life. The road to justice wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I had to find it. For myself, for Emily, and for the piece of my soul that still believed in redemption. As I lay there, the fluorescent lights glaring down on me like some merciless interrogation, I realized that my heart attack was just the tip of the iceberg. My health was in question, yes, but it was the betrayal that truly threatened to undo me. I needed to understand how things had gotten this far, how the daughter I'd once cradled in my arms could turn so cold. It was time for a reckoning. The moment I was discharged, I didn't head straight home. I made my way to a small cafe, the kind of place where anonymity is served alongside the coffee. I needed a quiet spot to think, to plan my next move. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through old emails, text messages, anything that might shed light on Karen's betrayal and the financial pit she had thrown me into. It wasn't long before I found the first clue, a series of bank statements I had overlooked during the chaos of our divorce. They showed a steady siphoning of funds over months, small enough to avoid immediate detection, but significant when viewed in totality. My blood boiled as I pieced together the financial deception that had been playing out behind my back. It wasn't just Karen's betrayal, it was a calculated theft, a dismantling of my financial security. Armed with this evidence, I hired a private investigator, a grizzled old guy named Tom who'd seen it all. I needed proof, something concrete to confront Karen with, something that would hold up in court. Tom assured me he'd dig deep, uncover every dirty little secret that had been hidden from me. Weeks went by, each day a lonely trek through the motions of my life. I kept my head down, focusing on recovery, but the rage inside me simmered, threatening to boil over. Then, one afternoon, Tom called. He had found what I needed: emails, texts, financial transactions that painted a clear picture of Karen's betrayal. Not just to me, but to Emily as well. Karen had manipulated our daughter, feeding her lies to alienate her from me. The woman I once loved had turned my own flesh and blood against me. Armed with this damning evidence, I arranged to meet Karen. We sat across from each other in a cramped lawyer's office, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I laid out the evidence, piece by piece, watching as the color drained from her face. Her arrogance, always so palpable, faded as the reality of her actions set in. "What do you want, John?" she hissed, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "Justice, Karen. I want my money back, and I want Emily to know the truth." The legal proceedings were swift. With the evidence I had gathered, the court ordered a return of the funds she had stolen. But that wasn't enough. Not for the years of manipulation, the damage to my relationship with Emily. I wanted more than just financial restitution. I wanted social retribution. I made sure everyone knew what she had done. Friends, family, the community. They all saw the real Karen, the woman behind the facade. And Emily? She discovered the truth in the most painful way. The emails, the lies, the betrayal. Everything came to light. It was a harsh awakening, one that left her reeling. For the first time in years, she reached out to me, tears in her voice as she apologized. It wasn't easy, and it didn't erase the pain, but it was a start. I never wanted things to end this way. I never wanted to be the man who sought vengeance, but sometimes justice requires it. And while I've learned that some wounds will never fully heal, there's solace in knowing that, at least this time, the truth has prevailed. As I stood outside the courthouse, the chilly autumn wind biting through my coat, I felt a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. The legal battle was over, the judgment as clear and unforgiving as the steel-grey sky above. Karen had been ordered to repay the stolen money, and her reputation lay in tatters, the facade she had so carefully constructed now irrevocably shattered. But the victory felt hollow. Walking away from the courthouse, I couldn't shake the image of Emily, her face pale and drawn as she absorbed the truth of her mother's betrayal. It was never supposed to be this way. I had wanted to protect her, shield her from the ugliness that had crept into her life. But there was no protecting her from reality, no undoing the damage already done. The weeks following the trial were a blur of paperwork and tense conversations. Emily stayed with friends, trying to process everything in her own time, in her own way. We spoke on the phone occasionally, brief exchanges filled with awkward pauses and unspoken apologies. I knew she was struggling, caught between the truth she had discovered and the loyalty she still felt towards her mother. Meanwhile, I set about rebuilding what had been torn apart. My finances, once precariously drained, began to stabilize. The return of my stolen funds allowed me to pay off debts, secure my home, and start fresh. But the satisfaction of financial security was tempered by the scars left on my heart. And then, there was the matter of my own health. The heart attack had been a wake-up call, the kind you can't ignore. I joined a support group, found solace in shared stories of recovery, and focused on regaining my strength. It was a slow, arduous process, but each day I felt a little stronger, a little more like myself. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, a hesitant knock echoed through the house. I opened the door to find Emily standing on the porch, her eyes reflecting a depth of emotion I had never seen before. She looked older, wiser somehow, as if the last few months had forced her to grow up quicker than either of us had wanted. "Can I come in?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," I replied, stepping aside to let her enter. We sat in the living room, the familiar space feeling strange and foreign after so much time apart. Emily fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, her gaze fixed on her hands as she struggled to find the right words. "I'm sorry, Dad," she finally said, her voice breaking, "for everything. I believed things that weren't true, and I pushed you away. I didn't know—" "Emily," I interrupted gently, reaching out to take her hand. "I know, and I'm sorry too. I should have seen what was happening, should have protected you better, but we're here now and we can start over." We sat in silence for a long time, the unspoken understanding between us bridging the gap that had grown so wide. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. Trust, once broken, takes time to mend, but it was a beginning. As the days turned into weeks, Emily and I began to rebuild our relationship. It was tentative at first, cautious, as if we were both afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. But gradually the walls came down, and we started to find our way back to each other. Karen, meanwhile, seemed to vanish into the background of our lives. The last I heard, she had moved to another state, seeking a fresh start of her own. I couldn't find it in myself to care. My focus was on Emily, on us, on the future we were slowly piecing together. It's strange how life can change so dramatically, how what you once thought was unshakable can crumble in an instant. But as I sit here watching the leaves fall outside my window, I realize that maybe, just maybe, this is the way it was meant to be, a chance to rebuild, to find strength in the broken places, and to write a new story, one filled with hope, redemption, and, ultimately, justice. The day Emily knocked on my door marked the beginning of a new chapter, but the shadows of the past lingered like ghosts, refusing to be easily exorcised. I spent countless nights reflecting on everything that had transpired, trying to make sense of the whirlwind that had consumed my life. Karen's betrayal had cut deeply, and the financial ruin she orchestrated felt like a deliberate act of malice. I still remember the day I discovered the accounts drained, the carefully concealed debts, and the lies woven so seamlessly into the fabric of our lives. It was as if I had been living with a stranger, a woman whose intentions I never truly understood until it was too late. In the aftermath of the trial, my mind often wandered to the details of her deceit. I had pieced together the puzzle through old bank statements, credit card bills with charges I couldn't recognize, and the whispered conversations I overheard late at night, conversations that left an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. But it was the confrontation that had sealed our fates, the moment when I laid it all bare, her infidelity and financial betrayal exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of our living room. She had tried to deny it at first, her voice trembling with feigned innocence. But when faced with irrefutable evidence, her demeanor shifted to one of cold defiance. The woman I once loved, the mother of my child, had become an adversary, her eyes filled with a bitterness that was almost palpable. The legal battle that ensued was brutal, a ruthless tug-of-war over assets and debts. But the outcome was clear. Karen was ordered to repay every penny she had stolen, her financial future as bleak as the lies she had built it upon. And while the judgment was satisfying, it did little to ease the ache of betrayal that lodged itself firmly in my chest. Yet amidst the chaos there was a measure of justice. I watched as her social circle crumbled, the carefully curated image she had projected shattered by the truth. Friends distanced themselves, and whispers of her actions spread like wildfire. Her attempts to start anew in a different state felt like an escape, a retreat from the consequences of her actions. As for me, I found solace in rebuilding. The tangible recovery of my finances was empowering, a testament to my resilience. It allowed me to regain control, to plan for a future that once seemed beyond my grasp. But the greatest satisfaction came from seeing Emily's gradual return to herself, her laughter slowly replacing the quiet sadness that had settled over her. We took it day by day, each conversation a step towards healing. I learned to listen more, to let Emily express her fears and frustrations without judgment. In turn, she allowed me glimpses into her world, sharing stories of school, friends, and dreams for the future that once felt out of reach. In those moments, I realized that my heart, though scarred, was healing too. The support group had become a lifeline, a place where I could voice my fears and frustrations, where shared understanding offered comfort. Each meeting reminded me that I wasn't alone, that others had walked similar paths and emerged stronger on the other side. And slowly, a sense of peace began to settle within me. Not the naive peace of before, but a hard-earned acceptance of what was and what could be. I found myself looking toward the future with cautious optimism, ready to write a new story, one grounded in truth, resilience, and the unwavering bond between father and daughter. Life, I realized, is not about clinging to what was, but about embracing what can be. And as I watched the autumn leaves continue to fall, I knew that this was my season of renewal, a time to redefine my own narrative and find justice, not in vengeance, but in the strength to move forward. The echoes of my daughter's words, "Find your own way home from the hospital," haunted me long after the heart attack that landed me in that sterile, fluorescent-lit room. It was a moment that crystallized the fracture in our relationship, a chasm created by the betrayal and deceit that had marred our lives. In the weeks following my discharge, my focus shifted to piecing together the remnants of my life. Karen's betrayal was a wound that still bled, but I was determined to not let it define me. The path to justice lay in exposing the full extent of her duplicity and reclaiming what rightfully belonged to me and Emily. The night I found the damning evidence was one of quiet desperation. I sat at the old oak desk in our study, sifting through stacks of bills and bank statements, unraveling the threads of Karen's financial schemes. Every new document I uncovered painted a grimmer picture than the last. Unauthorized withdrawals, secret credit card accounts, and lavish expenses hidden in plain sight tore at the seams of the life I thought I knew. I remembered the confrontation vividly, my hands clutching the papers, my voice steady, yet filled with the weight of betrayal. Karen's initial denial crumbled under the irrefutable proof, her defiance giving way to an icy resignation that chilled me to the bone. The woman I had trusted implicitly was now a stranger, her actions a betrayal of everything we had built together. Legal proceedings were swift and unyielding. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense professional with a reputation for fairness, ensured that every stolen cent was accounted for. The judge's ruling was clear. Karen was mandated to repay the full amount she had embezzled, her future now shackled to the debts she had accumulated in her quest for self-indulgence. As the dust settled, the scales of justice tipped in my favor. Watching Karen's social facade crumble was a bittersweet victory. Her friends, previously blind to her machinations, turned their backs, leaving her isolated and exposed. She moved away, perhaps seeking anonymity, but more likely fleeing the consequences she could no longer escape. For Emily and me, the road ahead was about rebuilding, brick by brick, day by day. We found strength in each other, reconnecting over simple moments that reaffirmed our bond. Her laughter, once stifled by the weight of our shared turmoil, began to ring out freely, a melody of hope and healing. In the quiet solitude of my heart, I found the peace I had been searching for, not the naive peace of unawareness, but a grounded acceptance of life's complexities. The support group meetings became a safe space, a sanctuary where shared stories of survival and resilience strengthened my resolve. I realized that my daughter's harsh words, spoken in anger and confusion, were not the end of our story, but a catalyst for change, a chance for both of us to redefine our lives, free from the shadows of deceit. We talked, we listened, and slowly, forgiveness found its place, not as a pardon for Karen, but as a release for ourselves. In embracing the future, I discovered that justice was not about vengeance, but about reclaiming agency over my narrative. As autumn leaves fell, signaling the end of one chapter, I turned the page to a new season, a season of renewal, grounded in truth, resilience, and an unbreakable father-daughter bond. In the wake of everything that had transpired, I found myself reflecting deeply on the events that had brought me to this point. The heart attack had been a wake-up call, a stark reminder of my own mortality and the fragility of the relationships I held dear. It was a turning point, not just in my health, but in the way I chose to live my life moving forward. Emily and I continued to rebuild our lives, taking each day as it came. Her initial anger and the cold words she had spoken at the hospital were slowly replaced by a growing understanding and compassion. We began to communicate more openly, confronting the emotions that had been buried beneath the weight of betrayal and grief. As we pieced our lives back together, I found myself consumed by the urge to ensure that Karen truly faced the repercussions of her actions. The legal victory had been one step, but my sense of justice demanded more. I wanted her to feel the full impact of her choices, to understand the pain she had inflicted not just on me, but on our daughter as well. I hired a private investigator, someone with a reputation for discretion and thoroughness, to delve deeper into Karen's life post-divorce. I discovered she had moved to a small town, attempting to start anew under a different name. But she couldn't hide her past. The trail of deceit she left behind was too prominent to simply brush aside. With the information provided by the investigator, I took steps to alert the community she had infiltrated. Anonymous tips found their way to local papers, detailing her past fraud and betrayal. It wasn't about public humiliation. It was about ensuring she couldn't simply escape the consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, I focused on securing Emily's future, determined to provide her with the stability and security Karen had threatened to strip away. I set up a trust fund in her name, ensuring that her college tuition and future endeavors were safeguarded against any unforeseen circumstances. It was a promise to her, one I intended to keep no matter the cost. Through therapy and support groups, both Emily and I learned to navigate the complex emotions tied to Karen's betrayal. We discovered that while forgiveness might not come easily, understanding and acceptance were within our reach. We released ourselves from the shackles of her actions, choosing to live for the future rather than remain anchored in the past. As months turned into years, the scars faded, leaving behind a tapestry of resilience and strength. Emily thrived, her laughter a constant reminder of the light that had returned to our lives. Together, we built a new chapter, grounded in the lessons learned from our shared experience. Looking back, I realized that true justice wasn't about Karen's downfall. It was about reclaiming control over our own narrative. It was about turning pain into power, betrayal into a foundation for growth. In a world where trust had been shattered, we found a way to rebuild piece by piece, embracing the future with open arms.